You could hear a pin drop if it weren't for the barking. Until that moment, Gate 17 at South Terminal looked exactly like you'd expect it to on a busy weekday morning. Stressed travelers rushed past each other like pieces on a chessboard. Flight announcements echoed from every direction, and the scent of overpriced coffee hung in the air. Babies cried. Suitcases thudded. The click-clack of heels and dragging wheels blended into the soundscape of organized chaos. People were tired, distracted, and preoccupied. No one noticed the storm that was quietly brewing beneath the surface of this ordinary day. And then came Ranger. Golden Retriever. Calm eyes, polished coat. His movement was precise, almost military. A sturdy harness sat across his back, clearly marked, "Service Dog, do not distract." Every muscle moved with purpose as he guided the man beside him through the bustling crowd. That man was Mark Leland, a tall, broad-shouldered figure in his late 40s. His dark sunglasses, weathered face, and deliberate steps told a story few dared to ask about. Mark was a blind veteran, one who had spent years in silence before this dog pulled him back from the edge of hopelessness. Together, they were more than a team. They were a unit, a story of survival in motion. People stepped aside to let them pass. Some nodded in respect. A child pointed and whispered, "That's a hero dog, Mama." The mother smiled and replied, "Yes, he is." No one doubted Ranger's discipline. No one questioned his training. But in just moments, Ranger would do something so unexpected, so intense, it would shatter the illusion of routine and leave. Everyone frozen in place, because even the most disciplined creatures sometimes act on instinct. And this time, that instinct would save a life. Just as Mark and Ranger were about to settle near the seating area, a strange stillness crept in. Something quiet, but unsettling. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of shift you only feel if you're paying close attention. And Ranger was. A woman emerged from the far corridor, walking briskly but cautiously. She wore an oversized beige coat, its collar raised high enough to shadow her face. The coat was far too thick for the mild spring weather inside the terminal, and it moved awkwardly with her steps, as if it hid more than just warmth. Pushing a squeaky, low-end stroller, the woman barely lifted her eyes. Her movements were deliberate, too controlled, like she had rehearsed every gesture. The baby, wrapped tightly in layers of blankets, didn't stir. Not a sound. Not a twitch. Something felt off. She scanned the terminal as she walked, not looking at people, but around them, avoiding gazes, fearing recognition. Her lips pressed into a hard line, like someone holding in a secret or a scream. People passed by her without notice. In the chaos of travel, she was just another face in the crowd. But Ranger noticed everything. The second she passed within 20 feet of him, Ranger stopped cold. His muscles went rigid, as if lightning had shot through his spine. Mark felt it instantly through the leash, a subtle, taut pull that broke the rhythm of their stride. "Ranger," he murmured, confused. Then came the bark. One, sharp and forceful. Heads. Turned. Ranger barked again, louder this time, then again. He leaned into the leash, pulling toward the woman with unshakable focus. Mark gripped the handle tighter, trying to regain control. "Heel, Ranger!" But the dog wouldn't budge. His front paws clawed the tile floor, his nose pointed straight at the stroller. His hackles were slightly raised, not in aggression, but in sheer, raw urgency. Ranger wasn't confused. He wasn't startled. He had locked onto something, and his instincts screamed that it wasn't right. The crowd began to ripple with unease. Travelers stopped mid-step. Conversations died down. A TSA officer on nearby patrol slowed, eyeing the commotion with growing concern. One woman clutched her child closer. A man pulled out his phone, recording. and the woman with the stroller. She froze like a deer in headlights. Her hands tightened on the handles so hard her knuckles went white. For a split second, her eyes darted toward the exit, and that flicker of fear, pure and unfiltered, was the crack in her carefully constructed mask. Ranger barked again, louder than before, this time frantic. He lunged toward the stroller. The leash strained. Mark stumbled forward, completely caught off guard. "Something's wrong," Mark whispered under his breath, sensing the tension vibrating through Ranger's body. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't bad behavior. It was a signal, an alarm, a message. Something about that woman, or that baby, was dangerously wrong, and Ranger wasn't going to let anyone ignore it. The moment Ranger's barking escalated, the terminal's atmosphere shifted dramatically. People who had been hurrying to their gates or lost in their own conversations suddenly stopped in their tracks, looking over with wide eyes. A low murmur swept through the crowd. "Is that dog malfunctioning?" Someone whispered nervously. "What's going on?" Another person asked, visibly shaken. A man in a business suit, clearly alarmed by the scene unfolding, stood up from his seat and gestured toward the woman with the stroller. "Ma'am, you need to move away from that dog," he called out, trying to break the tension. His words carried, and it wasn't long before the crowd began to pull back. A child, startled by the noise, started crying, and his mother quickly scooped him into her arms, her eyes darting from Ranger to the woman in the stroller. There was an overwhelming sense of unease in the air, with travelers visibly backing away, unsure whether the dog was dangerous. The sight of a service dog in a frenzy left people whispering nervously. A service dog was supposed to be calm and composed, not barking at a baby in the middle of an airport. Everyone felt the dread in the air as the situation spiraled into confusion. Mark, now fully aware that the situation was escalating beyond his control, tried his best to regain command over Ranger. His hand gripped the leash tighter, pulling back against the dog's forceful movements. "Ranger, stop! Heel!" he ordered, his voice steady but filled with a growing sense of urgency. But Ranger didn't listen. Instead, the dog let out another, deep, desperate whine that Mark had never heard before. It wasn't a typical sound of discomfort. It was a whine born of panic, a sound that chilled Mark to his core. Ranger's body trembled with the strain of holding back. He wasn't just pulling with strength now. He was pleading, almost as if he couldn't help himself. The dog's eyes locked on the stroller with unwavering focus, and his bark became more frantic, as if he was trying to alert everyone to something that was hidden from plain sight. People were becoming more anxious. Some were filming. Others backed away slowly, their eyes filled with fear. Mark felt a chill run down his spine, as the eerie sensation of something terribly wrong clawed at him. He'd been in enough tense situations to know this feeling. Something was off. Something was about to happen, but Mark couldn't pinpoint what. And Ranger wasn't letting go of whatever was in that stroller. It wasn't long before 2 airport security officers, summoned by the growing disturbance, arrived at the scene. The officers immediately took control of the situation, though it was clear that they, too, were trying to process the bizarre behavior of the dog. One officer walked toward Mark and Ranger, placing a hand on his radio as he kept an eye on the dog's increasingly erratic movements. "Sir, is everything okay with your dog?" he asked, his voice professional but concerned. Mark nodded quickly, his face tense with frustration. "It's not like him. He's never acted like this before." Meanwhile, the other officer approached the woman, his tone authoritative yet calm. "Ma'am, we need you to step aside, please. Is everything all right with the baby?" The woman, Vivian, didn't respond right away. Her eyes flicked nervously, from the officer to the stroller and back again. She tightened her grip on the stroller, her fingers pale from the pressure. For a moment she seemed to hesitate, then shifted slightly, positioning herself as though she was trying to shield the stroller from the officer's view. The officer's face hardened with suspicion, sensing that she wasn't being completely honest. Ma'am, we need to ensure the baby is okay, he repeated more insistently. Vivian's response was chilling in its simplicity. No, I can't, she muttered under her breath, her voice wavering with a mix of fear and something deeper, guilt perhaps. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, signaling the unease that was now settling over the scene. As if to amplify the growing tension, Ranger barked again, louder this time, his voice full of distress. But this time, he wasn't barking at Vivian, he was barking at the stroller. The noise rang out in the quiet terminal like an alarm. The crowd went silent for a moment, all eyes on the stroller. Whatever was hidden inside, it was clear that Ranger had found something he couldn't ignore, and neither could anyone else. Despite the mounting confusion, Ranger showed no signs of stopping. He planted himself firmly between the woman and the crowd, his body tense with determination. The barking intensified as the dog's attention remained fixed on the stroller. Ranger didn't budge. His focus was unshakable, as if he had made it his mission to protect whatever was hidden inside that stroller. People around them were still unsure what was happening, but it was clear that Ranger wasn't acting out of fear. He was acting out of instinct. His powerful nose began to sniff the air around the stroller, and then, to everyone's shock, he nudged it gently with his nose, moving closer with a sense of urgency. Mark, who had been struggling to control the dog, could only watch in disbelief as Ranger's behavior grew more intense. The crowd was growing more anxious, and Mark could feel the tension in the air. Ranger was still relentlessly focused on the stroller, his eyes locked on it, his tail stiff and unwavering. It was as if he had discovered something that no one else had yet seen. Mark's heart raced. He had trusted Ranger for years, but never had the dog acted this way in such a public setting. Was there something wrong with the baby? Was there danger? As the minutes ticked by, the situation seemed to take an even darker turn. The baby, who had been peacefully sleeping moments ago, suddenly began to stir in the stroller. A soft whimper broke the silence, followed by a full-blown cry. The change was sudden and jarring, drawing even more attention. But what struck everyone as unusual was the baby's color, pale, almost unnaturally so. The baby's breathing seemed shallow, each inhale more labored than the last, as if struggling to get enough air. A sense of unease spread throughout the crowd. This wasn't a normal crying baby. It was something more serious, something that couldn't be ignored. A nurse, who had been quietly waiting near the gate, immediately noticed the baby's distress. Her trained eye could pick up on the signs that most people would miss. Her gaze locked on the baby's face, her expression tightening with concern. The baby's skin had taken on a ghostly hue, and the shallow, irregular breathing suggested something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just a simple cry, it was a desperate signal. Without hesitation, the nurse rushed toward the stroller, her steps swift and purposeful. She knelt down, carefully checking the baby's vitals, and her face turned even graver. It was clear that the baby's condition was worsening by the second. This wasn't a typical case of discomfort. This was something life-threatening. In mere moments, the nurse sprang into action. She raised her hand, signaling to the nearby airport medics who had been alerted by the growing commotion. The medics rushed over, their faces marked by urgency. They took immediate control of the situation, carefully lifting the baby from the stroller to examine her more thoroughly. Within seconds, the diagnosis became painfully clear. The baby was suffering from a severe, life-threatening allergic reaction. The baby's throat was swelling, her airways constricting, and her body was beginning to shut down in a way that no one had expected. The nurse quickly administered an epinephrine shot, her hands steady despite the gravity of the moment. The medics continued their work, and within moments the baby's breathing began to stabilize. As the emergency response team worked tirelessly, Mark and the onlookers were left stunned. No one had realized just how close they had come to a tragedy. What was even more incredible, though, was how Ranger had known. The service dog had sensed the danger long before anyone else had. Before the symptoms had even appeared. Before the baby's color had changed, Ranger had alerted them to a situation no one could have predicted. The dog's sharp instincts had saved a life that day, in a way that no one could have imagined. As the medics continued to stabilize the baby, Vivian stood in shock, trembling with emotion. Her hands, still clutching the stroller, were shaking, uncontrollably. Tears began to well up in her eyes, blurring her vision. The reality of the situation hit her all at once. She had been completely unaware of how serious things were. The sense of guilt was overwhelming, and before she could control her emotions, she began to break down. I had no idea, she sobbed, her voice barely a whisper. I thought he was just sleeping. I never noticed anything wrong. Her words came out in between sobs, as if she was trying to make sense of the terrifying events that had unfolded before her. She hadn't seen the signs, hadn't recognized the subtle clues that something was deeply wrong with her baby. The thought that she might have lost him never even crossed her mind. Vivian, a single mother traveling alone, had been focused on getting through the flight and her journey. She hadn't expected something so life-threatening to happen so suddenly. But now, with the weight of everything crashing down on her, she was filled with an unbearable sense of guilt and disbelief. Her baby, her precious little one, had nearly slipped away, and she hadn't even known. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her tears flowing freely. She wasn't sure who she was apologizing to. Maybe to the baby for not seeing the danger sooner, or maybe to herself for not being more aware. But as she watched the baby's chest rise and fall more steadily, she realized just how close she had come to losing him. As the tension in the air began to dissolve, something extraordinary happened. The crowd, which had once been fearful and uncertain about the situation, began to shift their perceptions. Those who had been murmuring about the dog's behavior and even questioning whether Ranger had been a danger now looked at him with newfound respect and awe. The truth had become undeniable. Ranger had saved a life. One man who had been watching from a distance with skepticism earlier stepped forward, his eyes wide with admiration. "That dog just saved a life," he said quietly, almost as though he was speaking to himself. His words carried the weight of the revelation that had unfolded before everyone's eyes. Ranger wasn't just a service dog. He was a hero, a lifeline in a moment of crisis. A little girl, who had been watching the entire scene unfold from her mother's side, couldn't hold back her emotions. As the tension lifted and the baby's condition began to improve, she ran forward, her arms open wide, and wrapped her small arms around Ranger's neck in a tight hug. The golden retriever, ever so gentle, lowered his head and accepted the embrace, his tail wagging softly. It was as if he understood the gratitude in the child's gesture, a silent acknowledgement that he had done something far beyond his duty. For those who had witnessed the events, there was a shared sense of awe, of realizing that sometimes heroes come in unexpected forms. Not every day would hold such a moment, and not every day would reveal the quiet strength of an animal like Ranger. But for everyone in that terminal, the memory of that day would stay with them forever. What started as an ordinary airport day had now become something far more extraordinary, and soon the entire world would know about it. Phones began to buzz as bystanders quickly pulled out their devices to capture the heroic scene. Video clips, showing Ranger's urgent actions and the moment the baby was saved, began circulating almost immediately. The power of social media took over, and within hours, the story had gone viral. People were mesmerized by the incredible story of a service dog that had, without hesitation, saved the life of a helpless infant. The images of Ranger, his determined gaze and unwavering actions, captured the hearts of millions. Tweets, posts, and articles flooded the internet, with headlines praising the incredible dog for his bravery. Recognizing the importance of the moment, The airport issued an official statement, further amplifying the incredible feat. Ranger, the service dog, prevented a tragedy. The statement highlighted not only Ranger's role in preventing a disaster, but also the dedication and training that made him an exceptional service dog. It wasn't just about the rescue, it was about the trust that Mark had placed in his companion. Ranger's actions had proven, without a doubt, that he was more than just a guide dog. He was a lifesaver. While the world buzzed with admiration for Ranger, Mark stood quietly off to the side, watching as his dog was showered with attention and praise. He gave Ranger a gentle pat on the head, his voice full of quiet pride. "Good. Boy, you did it," he whispered. His words meant only for the dog. Mark's heart swelled with a mix of pride and emotion. He had always known that Ranger was special. He had seen it from the first moment they met. But as the crowd continued to murmur in awe and people gathered to take photos, Mark couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come together. There was a time, not so long ago, when Mark's life had been filled with darkness. After his military service, he had struggled with the weight of his past. The world had felt distant, cold, and detached, and Mark had often felt alone. But then Ranger had come into his life. The dog had been a lifeline, a source of companionship, and a reminder that there was still purpose to be found. Mark thought back to those dark days before Ranger, when the thought of finding peace had seemed impossible. Ranger had been his saving grace, offering unconditional love and loyalty, always, by his side. It wasn't just the dog's incredible instincts that made him a hero today. It was the same unwavering loyalty that had pulled Mark through his own personal battles. Mark had been rescued by Ranger long before that fateful day at the airport. Now, as he stood beside his dog, a small, content smile crept across his face. Mark knew that this moment was more than just a public display of heroism. It was the quiet, shared bond between a man and his dog, the unspoken gratitude and understanding that existed between them. As the chaos of the moment settled, the crowd began to disperse, but the weight of what had just transpired lingered in the air. People who had witnessed the events couldn't shake the feeling that they had just seen something extraordinary unfold. The story of Ranger's heroic actions had touched them deeply, leaving an indelible mark on their hearts. It wasn't just the baby's life that had been saved. It was a reminder of the quiet power of animals, the bond between humans and their four-legged companions, and the importance of trusting them when it matters most. For some, it was a shift in perspective. Those who had once feared or mistrusted dogs now found themselves reconsidering their stance. The doubt that had clouded their judgment was replaced by admiration for the selflessness and dedication animals could show. Ranger, who had been just another service dog to most of the crowd moments before, was now a symbol of bravery and loyalty. He had taught everyone who witnessed the moment a valuable lesson. Never underestimate the power of a true companion. As the crowd faded into the background and the scene began to calm, Mark sat down on a bench, Ranger once again by his side, sitting calmly at his feet. The dog's golden coat gleamed in the soft light of the terminal, his eyes alert but peaceful. Despite the extraordinary act of heroism he had just performed, Ranger remained as composed and focused as ever. It was the same quiet strength that had carried him through every day of his service to Mark. A dog that had once saved a man from his own despair had now saved a child from danger. And yet, he was still the same humble, loyal companion. A text. Overlay appeared on the screen as the camera captured Ranger in his quiet moment of rest. Sometimes, the most extraordinary heroes walk on four legs. Have you ever witnessed an animal do something truly unbelievable? Share your story below, because sometimes animals know what we don't.